The sound of gunshots cracked through the dry air of New Mexico territory, echoing off canyon walls like thunder trapped in a box. Two bodies hit the dirt before they could even reach for their weapons. Elias Morgan holstered his Colt Army Model 1860, the barrel still warm against his thigh. He didn't bother checking the fallen men. He never missed, not at this distance. 6 years as a Union scout during the war between the states had taught him that much. Should have known better than to steal a man's horses, he muttered, retrieving the reins of his Morgan stallion. The black beast snorted in agreement, pawing at the ground strewn with blood-soaked dust. The brand on the dead men's saddles told him all he needed to know. Garrison's men. Third time this month they tried to ambush travelers on the high trail. Elias wiped blood from his weathered face. At 42, the lines around his eyes had been carved by equal parts sun and sorrow. 6 years since he'd buried his boy, 3 since his wife had walked away. Some wounds time didn't heal, just covered them with scar tissue thick enough to keep moving. Copper Creek appeared through the heat haze like a mirage. 2 dusty rows of buildings pressed against the merciless desert. Elias rode in slow, his spine straight despite 18 hours in the saddle. The cattle drive had ended early, leaving him with coin in his pocket and nowhere particular to be. The saloon doors swung open with a familiar creak. Conversation dimmed as he entered, the way it always did when strangers arrived. Elias ordered whiskey, positioning himself where he could watch both the entrance and the mirror behind the bar. "You the fella just finished the Harrington Drive?" The barkeep slid a glass across the scarred wood. Elias nodded, downing the amber liquid in one practiced motion. "Looking for work?" "Depends on what's offering." His voice was gravel over steel, worn but unyielding. 2 men at a corner table had been watching since he entered. The larger one, a barrel-chested man with a silver-streaked beard, whispered something to his companion, a lean figure in an old Confederate colonel's coat. The colonel nodded, his eyes narrowing as he studied Elias. "I'd steer clear of the Eastern Valley," the barkeep continued, leaning closer. "That Apache widow's place. Strange things happen out there." "What widow?" Elias asked, signaling for another drink. "Keona. Husband was a scout for the cavalry. Got himself killed few years back." The barkeep shook his head. "Land's cursed now. Garrison's been trying to buy it for years, but she won't sell." "That right?" Elias's gaze drifted to the bearded man. Garrison, he assumed. The cattle baron's reputation had traveled as far as Santa Fe. "Garrison says there's silver in those hills. Colonel Blackwood's backing his claim. Says the land was never properly deeded to an Indian in the first place." Elias felt the familiar weight of decision settling between his shoulders. He hadn't planned to stay in Copper Creek, hadn't planned to stay anywhere. But something in the barkeep's tone made him uneasy. The eastern trail stretched before him like a dusty serpent. He hadn't intended to ride this way, but curiosity was a dangerous companion. Half a mile from town, he spotted them. 3 riders surrounding a lone figure beside a broken wagon. A woman, Apache by her features, struggling to fix a shattered wheel, while Garrison's men circled like wolves. "You're out of time, squaw," one called. "Boss says you leave today or we burn you out tonight." The woman, Keona, Elias presumed, straightened, a wrench gripped in her hand like a weapon. "This land is mine. Your boss knows it. Now get off my property." The lead rider's hand dropped to his pistol. "You threatening me, Indian?" Elias spurred his horse forward before conscious thought caught up. 3 armed men against 1 woman. Seems like she's not the one making threats. All eyes turned to him. The woman's gaze was sharpest, wary, calculating, measuring the new threat. "This ain't your business, stranger." The lead rider's hand hadn't left his gun. "Making it my business." Elias didn't touch his weapon. Didn't need to. The way he sat his horse told them everything. This wasn't his first dance. Something in his posture must have registered. The men exchanged glances, then backed their horses away. Garrison won't forget this, the leader spat. Neither will I, Elias replied evenly. When they were gone, he dismounted, approaching the broken wagon carefully. The woman hadn't moved, the wrench still gripped white-knuckled in her hand. Didn't ask for your help, she said. Didn't ask permission to give it. Elias knelt by the broken wheel. As he examined the splintered wood, his eye caught something in the exposed dirt. A flash of metallic gray streaked with black lines. Silver ore, rich vein by the look of it. He glanced up at Kiona. Her eyes told him she knew exactly what he'd seen. This why Garrison wants your land. She nodded once, her expression unchanged. Elias stood, dusting his hands. Wind shifting. Smell that? He looked toward the horizon where dust clouds were gathering. Sandstorm, big one. 2 hours, maybe less. Kiona followed his gaze. My cabin's just beyond that ridge. Better get this wheel fixed fast then. Together they worked in tense silence, Elias's skilled hands making quick work of the repair. As they finished, the first gust hit, hot wind carrying stinging particles of sand. Won't make it to town before it hits, Elias said, securing his horse to the wagon. Then you'd better come with me. It wasn't an invitation, just practicality in the face of deadly weather. The storm descended like God's own fury. By the time they reached the small cabin, visibility had dropped to arm's length. Elias helped secure the horses in the barn, fighting to close the heavy door against howling wind. A sudden gust tore it from his grasp, the edge catching him across the ribs with enough force to crack one. Pain lanced through his side as he finally secured the latch. Blood seeped through his shirt. The old wound from Shiloh had reopened. Inside the barn shelter, Kiona lit a lantern. Her eyes fell to his bloodied shirt. Old war wound, Elias explained, easing himself onto a hay bale. He removed his coat and lifted his shirt, revealing a jagged scar beneath fresh blood. From his saddlebag, he retrieved a small kit, needle, catgut, and a flask of whiskey. Kiona watched as he cleaned and stitched his own wound with practiced efficiency. No wasted motion. No complaint. You've done that before, she observed, more times than I care to count. He took a pull from the flask. Scout during the war. Learned to patch myself up when surgeons weren't available. The howling wind filled the silence between them. Your husband was a scout too, Elias finally said. Not a question. Her eyes narrowed. How do you know about my husband? Town talks. Says he died in the service. He died because Colonel Blackwood wanted this land. Her voice was flat. Led him into an ambush, then claimed it was hostiles. Elias nodded slowly. He'd seen enough of war to recognize the truth. You lost someone too, she said unexpectedly. I see it in how you carry yourself. He stiffened. Son? Fever took him 3 winters back. Wife couldn't bear it. Left the same month. The confession hung in the air between them. Neither comfort nor burden, just truth, bare as bone. Why stay here? Elias asked. They won't stop coming. This land was my husband's promise, our future. Her eyes met his, unflinching. Would you run from what's rightfully yours? Before he could answer, a sound cut through the storm's roar. Horses approaching, despite the deadly weather. Elias was on his feet instantly, pain forgotten. Through a crack in the barn wall, he spotted 3 riders, bandanas covering their faces. Garrison's men returning as promised. Only fools or desperate men would ride in such conditions. They're coming to burn you out, he said, checking his Colt. Storm's their cover. Kiona's expression hardened. From beneath a loose floorboard, she retrieved an old cavalry carbine. I won't leave, she said simply. Elias nodded. He hadn't intended to get involved in someone else's war, hadn't planned to stay in one place long enough for trouble to find him. But some decisions made themselves. Then we'd better make sure they regret coming. Dawn broke crimson over Copper Creek. the storm's passage leaving the world newly sculpted in windblown drifts. Elias stood on the porch of Kiona's cabin, studying the tracks left by their midnight visitors. 3 had come, 2 had ridden away. The third lay buried behind the barn, a bullet from Elias's Colt, having found its mark when the man had tried to torch the stable. "They'll be back," Elias said when Kiona joined him, "with more men." She nodded, her face composed. "You should go. This isn't your fight." "Maybe not." He turned to face her. "But I've seen what men like Garrison and Blackwood do to those who stand in their way. No one deserves to face that alone. Why help an Apache widow you barely know?" His weathered face revealed nothing. "Maybe I'm tired of walking away." Over the next 3 days, Elias transformed the small homestead into a defensive position. He reinforced the cabin walls with earth-filled sacks that could stop bullets, dug shallow trenches that offered cover, set trip lines among the brush that would alert them to approach. All the while, he taught Kiona to shoot. Not just aim, but shoot to kill. "Hold your breath before you squeeze," Anahi instructed, positioning her hands on the carbine. "Don't pull the trigger. Press it like you're testing a ripe fruit." She was a quick study. By the second day, she was hitting cans at 50 yards. And on the third morning, Elias rode toward town. They needed ammunition, supplies, and information. The storm had bought them time, but Garrison wouldn't wait forever. "If I'm not back by sundown," he told Kiona before leaving, "head for the hills, don't look back." She met his gaze steadily. "I won't run." He knew she meant it. Copper Creek seemed subdued, the aftermath of the storm still evident in damaged roofs and sand-piled doorways. Elias tethered his horse outside the general store, senses alert for trouble. Inside, he collected what they needed: ammunition, coffee, salt, bandages. The shopkeeper eyed him curiously. "You're staying out at the Apache woman's place," he said. "Not a question." Elias didn't respond, counting coins onto the counter. "Garrison's been asking about you. Him and the colonel both." "Let them ask." The shopkeeper leaned closer. "Word is they're bringing in professional guns from Santa Fe. 6, maybe 8 men." Elias nodded his thanks for the information and gathered his supplies. As he stepped onto the boardwalk, he spotted them. 4 men flanking the street, watching him. Garrison's welcoming committee. He secured his purchases and mounted his horse, turning deliberately toward the eastern trail. Let them follow. Better to choose the ground for what was coming. They didn't wait long. Half a mile outside town, where the trail narrowed between 2 rocky outcroppings, the ambush sprung. 4 riders blocking the path ahead, guns drawn. Elias didn't hesitate. He spurred his horse off the trail, up the rocky slope to his right. Bullets kicked up dust around him as he rode. Drawing his Colt, he fired twice over his shoulder, not aiming to hit, just to divide their attention. The ridge offered momentary cover. Elias dismounted, slapping his horse to send it running, then dropped to a shooter's position behind a boulder. The first pursuer rounded the bend, and Elias's bullet took him cleanly from the saddle. The second rider fell just as quickly. The third and fourth split up, trying to flank him. Rookie mistake on open ground against a former scout. Elias tracked the dust of their movement, patient as death itself. When the third man emerged from behind a scrub oak, Elias was waiting. 1 shot. The man clutched his chest and toppled. Only one left. Silence stretched, broken only by the wind. A twig snapped to his left. Elias rolled as a bullet chipped stone where his head had been. He came up firing. 3 rapid shots that found their mark. The final attacker crumpled mid-stride. Elias reloaded methodically, then approached the fallen man, still breathing, but not for long. "Tell me about Garrison's plan," he demanded. Blood bubbled from the man's lips. "Tomorrow, at dawn, Blackwood's bringing dynamite from the mine. Said they'd bury her if she wouldn't leave." "How many men?" 20, maybe more." The man coughed wetly. "You can't stop them all." Elias didn't bother responding. The dying man was right. He couldn't stop 20 armed men alone. But he hadn't survived Shiloh, Antietam, and 3 Comanche raids by fighting fair. Gathering his scattered supplies, Elias whistled for his horse, which returned cautiously. He needed to get back to Keona's. They had work to do before dawn. The unexpected sight of smoke from the cabin's chimney made Elias draw his pistol. Keona wasn't alone. He approached cautiously, circling wide to come in from behind the barn. A strange horse was tethered there, paint stallion with cavalry tack. Inside the cabin, voices. Elias recognized Keona's. Then another, male, deep, speaking in what sounded like Apache. He kicked the door open, gun leveled. An old man sat at Keona's table, weathered face creased with age, long gray hair in braids. Despite his years, his posture spoke of strength. "Running Wolf," the old man introduced himself calmly, unfazed by the gun. "I was Scout with Keona's husband." "He came to warn us," Keona explained. "Blackwood's men are coming at dawn." "I know." Elias holstered his weapon. "4 tried to make sure I didn't make it back to tell you." Running Wolf nodded appreciatively. "You fight like Apache, silent, patient. I fight like someone who wants to live." Elias dropped his supplies on the table. "We're outnumbered. Blackwood's bringing dynamite." "Then we prepare," Running Wolf said simply. Through the afternoon and into evening, the 3 worked. Running Wolf knew the land better than either of them, pointing out defensive positions, places to retreat if needed. Elias crafted simple but effective traps, tripwires, covered pits, sharpened stakes hidden in the brush. Keona prepared the cabin itself, moving valuables to a hidden cellar, filling water barrels in case of fire, loading every weapon they had. As night fell, unexpected figures appeared on the horizon. The shopkeeper from town, accompanied by the blacksmith and 3 other men. "Heard Garrison was planning something big," the shopkeeper explained when they approached. "Didn't seem right. 20 against 2. "Why help us?" Keona asked, suspicious. "Garrison's been bleeding this town dry for years," the blacksmith answered. "Man thinks he owns everything and everyone. Time somebody stood up to him." 7 against 20. Still poor odds, but better than before. As Elias assigned positions and explained the plan, he caught Keona watching him. Something new in her gaze. Not just determination now. Something that looked dangerously like hope. "Get some rest," he told everyone finally. Dawn comes early. First light brought fog crawling through the valley. Unusual for the season, but welcome cover. Elias crouched behind a boulder 30 yards from the cabin, Running Wolf beside him. The others were positioned strategically around the property, the shopkeeper and blacksmith guarding the western approach, Keona herself in the cabin with the best rifle. "They come," Running Wolf whispered, tilting his head. Elias couldn't hear anything yet, but he trusted the old scout's ears. Minutes later, he caught it, the soft jingle of tack, muffled hoofbeats. Many horses, approaching slowly. Through the thinning fog, shapes materialized. Riders, at least 15. At their center, Colonel Blackwood's lean figure was unmistakable in his Confederate gray. Beside him, Garrison sat his horse like a man who owned the ground beneath him. 4 men carried bundles strapped to their saddles. The dynamite, most likely. The riders halted 100 yards from the cabin. Blackwood rode forward slightly. "Keona," he called, "this is your last chance. Come out now. No one needs to die today." From the cabin window, Keona's rifle barrel appeared. Her response was a single shot that kicked up dirt at Blackwood's horse's feet. The colonel's face hardened. He signaled to his men, who began to spread out for the attack. They never saw the first trap, a simple tripwire that sent 3 horses tumbling, riders thrown hard to the ground. Gunfire erupted immediately, bullets splintering wood and chipping stone. Elias waited, counting silently. When Blackwood's men committed to their line of attack, He gave the signal, 3 short whistles. The shopkeeper and blacksmith opened fire from the western flank, catching the attackers in crossfire. 2 men fell immediately. A third clutched his arm, horse rearing in panic. Garrison bellowed orders, directing men toward what he thought was the source of ambush. They rode straight into the hidden pit Elias had dug the night before, a 6-foot drop lined with sharpened stakes. Screams joined the gunfire. Elias picked his targets carefully, each shot deliberate. Running Wolf moved like a man half his age, using the brush for cover as he worked closer to the 4 men carrying dynamite. The battle's tide began to turn. Blackwood's men, expecting an easy raid against a lone woman, found themselves caught in prepared defenses with enemies on all sides. But numbers still favored the attackers. Bullets whined past Elias's head with increasing accuracy as Blackwood's gunmen located his position. A cry from the cabin drew his attention. One of Garrison's men had reached the porch. Before Elias could aim, Kiona appeared in the doorway, her husband's cavalry saber flashing. The attacker stumbled back, clutching his throat, then collapsed. Garrison himself had disappeared in the chaos, but Blackwood remained, directing the men with the dynamite toward the silver-laden creek bed. "The mine!" Running Wolf called to Elias. "They will destroy it rather than leave it." Elias broke cover, sprinting toward the creek. Bullets kicked up dust at his heels, but he didn't slow. If Blackwood collapsed that hillside, the cabin and everyone near it would be buried. He caught the first dynamite carrier from behind, dragging him from his horse with a tackle that drove both men to the ground. A quick strike with his knife ended the struggle. The remaining 3 had reached the creek bed. One was already setting charges while the others provided cover fire. Elias dropped to one knee, steadied his breathing, and fired. The man with the dynamite jerked, then fell face first into the creek. Return fire forced Elias to roll behind a boulder. When he looked again, Blackwood himself had dismounted, grabbing the fallen dynamite. "It's over, Colonel," Elias called. "Most of your men are down." "It's only over when I say it is." Blackwood's voice carried the same command presence it must have held during the war. "This land was never meant for Apache hands. I'll see it buried before I let her keep it." The colonel struck a match. Elias fired, but too late. The fuse sputtered to life. Blackwood smiled grimly. 2 minutes before that charge blows. Not enough time to reach it and not enough time to run. Your choice, Scout. Elias fired again, catching Blackwood in the shoulder. The colonel stumbled but remained standing, drawing his own pistol. What followed wasn't a duel so much as mutual execution attempt. Both men fired, advancing with each shot. Blackwood's bullet grazed Elias's temple. Elias's shot took Blackwood in the leg. They closed to arm's length, guns empty, and grappled in the creek bed. Blackwood was surprisingly strong for his lean frame. He drove a knife toward Elias's throat, stopped only by Elias catching his wrist. "I killed her husband," Blackwood hissed. "Sent him straight into Comanche territory with false orders, all for this land. You think I won't kill you too?" Elias didn't waste breath responding. He slammed his forehead into Blackwood's nose, feeling it crunch. As the colonel reeled back, Elias drove his own knife up under the ribs, angled toward the heart. Blackwood's eyes widened in shock. "You can't!" His voice failed as blood filled his lungs. Elias pushed the dying man aside and scrambled toward the dynamite. The fuse had burned half its length. No time to defuse it properly. He grabbed the bundle and ran toward the deepest part of the creek bed, away from the cabin. 20 yards. 30. The fuse sparked near its end. With a final desperate heave, he threw the dynamite into a narrow ravine and dove behind an outcropping of rock. The explosion shook the earth, rock and debris raining down. A cloud of dust rolled over him like a wave. When it cleared, a section of the ravine had collapsed, but the main creek bed and the silver vein remained intact. Elias limped back toward the cabin through settling dust. The gunfire had stopped. As he crested the rise, he saw Garrison on his knees, hands raised in surrender. Running Wolf stood over him, rifle aimed steadily. Kiona met Elias halfway, her face streaked with dirt and blood that wasn't hers. "Blackwood?" she asked. "Dead. Confess to your husband's murder before the end." She absorbed this with a single nod. "It's over," Elias said, surveying the battlefield. Wounded men were being tended. The dead lay where they had fallen. "No," Kiona said quietly. "Now it begins." 1 week later, Judge Wesley Franklin rode in from Santa Fe. He heard testimony from all sides: the shopkeeper, Running Wolf, the surviving attackers, and Kiona herself. Elias's testimony was brief and direct. He presented Blackwood's personal journal, recovered from the colonel's saddlebag, detailing the conspiracy to seize the silver-rich land. The judge's ruling came by midday. Kiona's deed was valid. Garrison would stand trial for conspiracy and attempted murder. The land and the silver beneath it remained hers. As the judge departed, the people of Copper Creek approached the cabin, not as enemies this time, but as neighbors. The shopkeeper brought supplies. The blacksmith offered to help rebuild damaged sections. "Seems you've earned their respect," Elias observed as they stood on the porch, watching the townspeople work. "Not me," Kiona said. "We. You could have ridden past that day, could have left during the storm, could have run before the fight. You stayed." Elias gazed across the valley that had nearly become his grave. For 6 years he drifted, carrying grief like a burden, never setting it down long enough to call any place home. "I'm tired of leaving," he said finally. Kiona didn't smile. That wasn't her way. But something in her eyes softened. "Then don't." She held out her hand, not in supplication or gratitude, but as an equal, a partner. Elias took it, his calloused palm against hers. They stood together on the porch as the sun cast long shadows across land that had been defended with blood and was now finally at peace. Behind them, the cabin door stood open. Inside, a fire burned in the hearth. Outside, the vast New Mexico sky stretched endlessly above Apache Valley. For the first time in years, Elias Morgan didn't feel the urge to ride toward the horizon. He had found something worth standing for, something worth staying for. The war was over, and he was home.